today's video, we're doing a review of a really cool product that I recently came across called Art Conductor, made by a company called Babylonwaves. So it's currently in version 7 in its life cycle, 7.5 at the time that I'm doing this video. And I think it's a pretty awesome tool for composers or anybody producing in Studio One. I'm going to make sure that I add a link to the description of the website here. And you can see they have different DAWs that they support. In this case, we are going to be looking at Studio One, obviously, because that's the one that I use. But you can see over here, made of over 7,000 templates for all major libraries, including Spitfire, Vienna Symphonic Library, all the way across to lots of other different developers. Now, before we get started, first off, disclaimer, this copy is an NFR. It was provided to me so that I could do this review video, but I'm no way associated or affiliated with Babylonwaves, and this is a completely independent review. Secondly, if you're looking for really detailed information with respect to sound variations and composing, working with different virtual instruments, I'd highly recommend checking out Lucas Rashitska's channel, or his Jazz Undo on YouTube. I'll make sure that I add a link in either the info card or the description. But he's got a lot of great content, and this is something that he does every day as opposed to me just doing it when I need to. All right, so let's dive in. As you know, or maybe may or may not know, in Studio One, we got sound variations. And essentially what this means is that it provides an easier way for us to work with virtual instruments that have different key switches that can be changed. So we've got kind of 3 different versions of this over the life cycle of version 5. The first one was a very simple implementation, and then next it went a little bit deeper, and we actually changed it to sound variations. And in the latest rendition of this, we actually got musical symbols in addition to this. But what I wanted to do is, instead of focusing on it from a composer who uses a ton of virtual instruments and has just sample libraries on external hard drives, I wanted to focus more along the lines of somebody who works with other people, and I will get a Studio One song that's maybe used a different virtual instrument where they've already gone through the process of, changing the sound variations for specific parts, and all of that is embedded within the instrument part. And then I either get it to mix or to do some co-production. And then I maybe need to either change or move it to a different instrument or whatever that case might be. So that's the way I'm going to approach this. Now, I've got a very basic piano part, just an instrument part over here, just cycling through some different chords. And this is just a very basic acoustic piano soft Presence XT instrument. Now then, I wanted to take a look at 3 different string libraries, and I kind of thought we would put this through in terms of the different tiers which I see. So you could have something which is very simple, like the stock string ensemble library that ships with the Contact factory content. So just a string ensemble. We have different sound variations over here. And then we have something that's a little bit more middle of the ground. So this is the Symphony Essentials string ensemble. And again, you can see in terms of the sound variations over here, or the different articulations that we have, we've got a few more than we do with the basic Contact version. And last but not least, this is the boutique library that I own, which is Chamber Strings by Spitfire. And we've got a lot of different articulations over here. Now, the whole idea, whenever you load any type of sound variation, is that you need to load a sound variation preset. So based on the instrument and the developer or the manufacturer, you can load that. Now, you can create these yourself, in which case I've done this one, where I actually think I did this on a tutorial video, and this is just where I left off with it. In addition to that, if this either seems daunting to you or you just want to try to save some time, you can go to the Browse tab. If you head to the Cloud section and you go under Presonus Exchange and you sign in, we have this section over here. It's still named Key Switches, which I think is appropriate. We've got lots of different folders that have been created by different users, so you can kind of do a search. It might take you a little bit to find the proper instrument that you're looking for, but in general, I think they're labeled pretty well and they seem to be done pretty accurately. Okay, so we have something that's loaded already for this one. If I take a look at this, would be an example of an instrument where I believe that I downloaded this from Exchange. I think I found them and there was some and they were done, and I said, okay, well, I'll just download those. So the whole idea here is once you've downloaded them, you can click in this little drop-down area And here we have this folder, this subfolder, and I can go to String Ensemble, and then I want to go to String Ensemble Essential. So now I've loaded the sound variation preset that goes with this library. Once that preset has been loaded, at that point, you could then start selecting these actual, the note data. You can right click and you can choose a specific sound variation to assign to that. So this is great and all, but there's one thing that's kind of, it's not really that it's a pain in the butt or anything. It's just a byproduct. It is what it is, that when you work this way, each instrument has a different sound variation preset, that any key switch articulation changes that you make, they're going to be relevant and specific to that instrument only. What do I mean by this? Okay, let's take a look at the same note data in terms of the same chord progression, but in this case I just basically went through and selected these different sections and I applied a different sound variation. Now what ends up happening if either A, you're doing a writing session where you're doing something simple, maybe you forgot a hard drive and you don't have some of your other libraries, or you need to collaborate with somebody and you send this session to them and they go to open it up and they say, you know what, I don't even have the stock Contact library content installed, but I do have something by 8DO, or I do have something by Spitfire, or insert any awesome sample library developer into that equation. So what happens then if I just took the instrument part and I wanted to go ahead and create a new track? If I Option or Alt drag this down, notice that it comes across and we can see all the different sound variations in terms of where they've been added, but they have this question mark over here, right? And that'll be the exact same regardless of which developer you're working with. If I do the same thing and I drag it to Spitfire, you can see that nothing's recognized here. It understands that there's something linked to this, and if you do have a sound variation, you could manually reattach these as needed, but that's not what we want to do at all, or at least that doesn't make the process easy. Now, what does make it easy for me is if you take a look at what's included in Art Conductor 7.5, first of all, it's a sound set. So the way that you install it is super simple. You just drag it onto the Studio One icon. And then when you log in or when you open up Studio One and it scanned your presets, scroll all the way to the bottom here, you see Art Conductor Studio One. You can open up this folder. You can see all of the different audio manufacturers, the developers that are included in this. So you have stuff from Native Instruments. They have like a lot of the lineup over here. You can see that same Symphony Essentials over here. We have some of the bigger names like Spitfire. We're going to touch base on that in a moment, but you can see all the different collections that they have. And then within all these collections, they have the different patches and whatnot. So there's a lot of information here. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. You might say, well, didn't we get an option where developers can automatically report those and then we don't need to load them? And yeah, this is true. There are certain third-party developers that automatically, natively just report that to Studio One. So the minute you load the instrument, you don't even have to load the sound variation preset. It just loads automatically. But the way I see it is having something in the interim that can work in a way that allows me to have a better translation if I'm collaborating or if I want to mix between different developers. That's pretty awesome. So here we have the same exact setup, the same three instruments in the same order and the same colors with the same instrument part. Now, the one thing that's different with these cases, though, is as opposed to loading the sound variation that I created or that I downloaded from Exchange, I'm actually loading the sound variation that I found in the menu, in the submenu rather, of Babylonwaves. So if I open up Art Conductor, we can go over here to Native Instruments. So I'm just going to open up Native Instruments. And then this is pretty easy because it's just a factory content. So we say factory library, and then we know it's VSL strings. And then I know that I'm using the string ensemble. So all I have to do is just load this. And now I've loaded the sound variation preset, but the Art Conductor version. So how is this one different? Well, essentially they've remapped the most popular articulations. They've remapped them so that they're unified across the board. And we can see that the translation is pretty good with respect to different developers. So if we take a look at this same example over here, in this one, this is just a sustained patch. But if I now open up this version of it, I've done the same thing over here. I've just basically highlighted these, and then I've just applied a sound variation to this. So now we have the sound variation on this. This is a completely different developer that with respect to this one or this one. But in these cases, this is very easy now to do something like this, where I can just Alt-Option drag down and take a look at this. This is a different instrument. This is the string ensemble, the Symphony Essentials string ensemble. And when I dragged the instrument part from this track down to the other, notice that it did a really good job in terms of translating these different sound variations. So if I was to play this now, okay, I would still have to go through and edit the dynamics on the instrument so that I could hear everything. But this starting point for me is like 10 times better than me starting off from this, where all of the information came across, but none of these make any sense, and I would have to physically go in and remap each one individually. I'm already at a really good starting point with this translation. Now let's do the same thing. We're going to use the same instrument part over here, which has the sound variation loaded is the Art Conductor version of the string ensemble factory patch. If I go to this and I Alt-Option drag this down to Spitfire, notice over here, okay, we have one translation issue where it didn't pick up one a sound variation in particular, but it got all the rest of them. So now if I listen to this, that's very light. I'd have to bring up that level. The pizzicato. So for me, as somebody who composes once in a while when they have to, but it's more just to augment a production or to add a layer of something. Also for me, as somebody who receives something to mix from somebody else, and I might need to either change the instrument or add something, this is so useful. Because if you're working in part of a production team where maybe you have, most of you have the same libraries, but occasionally other ones don't have libraries, I'm going to give this in context in terms of the way that I actually work. If I'm working with somebody and they're working on a production, we use the transform function all the time. So I'll give you an example. Let's take a look at this one as an example. Let's say that I'm the person and I need to prepare this session to go to a production partner, or it could be the opposite. What ends up happening is that we basically just do a track transform, and we'll render the instrument tracks, and you can remove the virtual instrument or leave it there. It doesn't really matter, but for sake of demonstration, check this out. You're rendering this because it's going to another stage in the production. So it comes to me, we usually share over Dropbox, or you can share in Sphere or whatever way that you want to. Notice that I have audio, which is great, because if I don't have this sample instrument, then I can at least play it and we can continue to work. But like I said, the really cool thing about using the track transform is that you still have the MIDI information. Now, if the person who's created this, who's transformed these tracks and who's created this song, if they're using the Art Conductor version of the sound variation presets for all the different manufacturers, it's also great that they're there and you don't have to go search for them. Then I can still, from this audio event, which was transformed, I can still get all the relevant information. So if I drag this onto the next instrument track, essentially just extracting the MIDI from this, notice that if I open this up, it still has the sound variations. It still has all the proper MIDI information and note data that I need. So even if we decide to change something and we're using track transform, I can use this as my starting point, and then this becomes really useful. Now, the other thing that's happened to me before is I've done some mixes for something, some spots for different composers, for example, and maybe something they didn't catch is that something was not set right in the sample library, and they were doing an offline bounce, and I get a bunch of stems. Then it might be the case that I get a file, and when I'm listening to it, when I start cleaning things up, I start noticing all these mistakes. Sometimes it's a mistake in the sample library itself, where a certain velocity level or a certain note that was triggered a bad sample or a dead sample or something that sounds like it's part of the wrong group. Maybe it's like a pizzicato instead of a sustain or something like that. In those cases, I have actually asked some composers that I work with would actually send me the consolidated MIDI file of what they did. So can you imagine being able to share MIDI files, and if you have a problem or you decide in the mix that, hey, I love what you did with this piano or this string library, but it's not really working in the mix, or we've changed the production. If you're using the Art Conductor versions, then it's so easy to actually just drag these to another instrument and to have that translation and that playability that's instantaneous. And not to mention just the fact that if you're working and you are a composer who is working with lots of different libraries, wouldn't it be great to do what I just did? You have a string section, or maybe you have a solo cello, and you've composed something and you've assigned different articulations and you've adjusted everything and it sounds great. And then you want to maybe double that or layer that with another instrument from a different manufacturer altogether. Just being able to drag in a new instance of Contact and to be able to do that, that's pretty awesome. One thing I want to point out though, in the Spitfire version, at least to my understanding, is that I couldn't get this to work at first, and I thought, well, that's too bad. It doesn't work with Spitfire. But then a little bit of experimentation, and then after experimenting, verifying that with some comments I found on a forum, is that if you're wanting to use the Spitfire versions of the Art Conductor stuff for Studio One, that you need to come into the instrument. And if you click this little wrench icon in Contact, you see where this lock is. You have this drop-down menu. The way that this works with Spitfire is it's locked to UACCKS key switch. So when you use this version, when you set your Spitfire instances to this version, then everything works perfectly fine. And any key switches that were derived directly from Art Conductor, they're going to work out perfectly fine. And like I said, again, it's very easy to load these. It's very easy to find the different sections over here. In this case, I would go to Spitfire, and then I know that I'm running chamber strings, so I just scroll to chamber strings. And then we have advanced other patches, and then we also have the main patches over here. And then I'm just choosing Spitfire chamber strings ensembles, which matches the actual preset that I'm using from Contact. And then that's it. Once you do that, everything just works as you would expect. So I think it's a great tool to be able to use, and I would highly recommend it for anybody who finds themselves in any of the cases that I've described in this video, either collaborating or just wanting that flexibility and freedom of working in a more unified way. Now, if you're working in something where a third-party developer is natively reporting the key switches and the sound variations to Studio One and they just show up, then this is probably not for you, and that's understandable. And I think if you're working with something really high-end libraries like Synchron Player stuff, that there's a good chance that maybe you've made that investment for a reason, and you don't necessarily need to have some of these key switches because you're not really using other libraries, or you've specifically turned to that product because it has so many different options in terms of the different articulations that are available within that instrument. So, is it a perfect translation 100%? No. But is it pretty great? Yes, it is. Would I recommend it? Yes, I absolutely would. Anyways, that's it for this review. Babylonwaves, you get 2 thumbs up from me. You've done a fantastic job with this, and I wish you well with this product, and I look forward to using this in future productions. Anyways, that's it for me. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.